Welcome to Read Aloud. I'm Dan Simpson. It's me. Dan Simpson from the internet. They call me Commie Knoxville. They call me Hammer Dan Sicklepants. I told them not to, but they keep doing it. Anyways, welcome to my little show where I read stuff to you and then we talk about it. I have a discussion with my live chat here on Twitch. It's great. Jump in there. Twitch.tv/iDanSimpson. Anyways, I stream there some days and sometimes most days. It's hard to say. And I stream in the morning in my time zone. We're going to get started here reading from Chapter 6 of Marxism and the National Question. If you listen to the previous chapter, you'll notice that I misread the summary. That summary did not apply to that chapter. It applies to this chapter. And we'll read it again. Here it is. Chapter 6, the Caucasians, the Conference of the Liquidators. In this chapter, Joey Steelman, as I like to call him, continues his ideological struggle against cultural national autonomy. This time in the context of the Caucasian Social Democrats' failure to succumb to reaction by their disavowal of regional economic autonomy in favor of national cultural autonomy, thereby throwing the masses at the mercy of vicious reactionaries, thus violating the program of social democracy. This is the penultimate chapter in the foundational text on Marxist theory on the question of nationality and the nation. Chapter 6. We spoke above of the waverings of one section of the Caucasian Social Democrats who were unable to withstand the national epidemic. Thank you. I said penultimate. You like that? That's a $5 word. Checks in the mail. These waverings were revealed in the fact that, strange as it may seem, the above-mentioned Social Democrats followed in the footsteps of the Bund and proclaimed cultural national autonomy. And if you're unclear as to the meaning of cultural national autonomy, please refer to previous chapters. You could do so on my Twitch, where I have a collection of videos. And I think after all of this is said and done, there will be a playlist on YouTube as well. If you like this content, please support it. It helps me keep it going. Reading on. Regional autonomy for the Caucasus as a whole, and cultural national autonomy for the nations forming the Caucasus. That is the way these social democrats, who incidentally are linked with the Russian liquidators, formulate their demand. Listen to their acknowledged leader, the not unknown N, which to me has no meaning. Does that mean... Oh. You know what? Isn't that rich? Isn't that just rich? I try to do a highlight or something, and I'm trying to teach people about Marxism, and then they're like, hey, you got to pay to highlight. Chat says you also don't know who it was. You had no idea how do you Google that? What do you know what you need? You need a degree in AI prompting to figure that one out. What do you think it costs to upgrade this ebook reader? Jesus Christ. Should I just do the lifetime? I don't know how much I'm going to use this. Let's just do 3 months here, okay? And I'm going to do this off screen. You're watching the replay. I'm sure this is fun for you. Just give me a few moments here to go premium. What a fucking joke, dude. Yeah. I probably got to punch in my fucking card. Oh, it somehow has my PayPal. Okay. $3. Is this $3 a month to highlight words and put bookmarks? I hate my life, you know? I'm sure Marx has a text that explains why this is happening. It's right there in like chapter 5 of Capital or something. All right, we're back, and I'm premium, baby. I could do more highlights. The not unknown N. Oh, look at that. Was that worth $3? It really didn't feel like it. I gotta be honest. Okay. Thanks for bearing with me. Everybody knows, reading on, quote, everyone, this is the not unknown N, quote, everybody knows that the Caucasus differs profoundly from the central gubernias, both as regards the racial composition of its population and as regards its territory and agricultural development. The exploitation and material development of such a region require local workers acquainted with local peculiarities and accustomed to the local climate and culture. All laws designed to further the exploitation of the local territory should be issued locally and put into effect by local forces. This is extremely reasonable language. Actually, that part, right? Sounds great. He says, consequently, the jurisdiction of the central organ of Caucasian self-government should extend to legislation on local questions. Hence, the functions of the Caucasian Center should consist in the passing of laws designed to further the economic exploitation of the local territory and the material prosperity of the region. Thus, regional autonomy for the Caucasus. Stalin says, if we abstract ourselves from the rather confused and incoherent arguments of N, it must be admitted that his conclusion is correct. His work is wrong, but he got the right answer. Regional autonomy for the Caucasus, within the framework of a general state constitution, which N does not deny, is indeed essential because of the peculiarities of its composition and its conditions of life. This was also acknowledged by the Russian Social Democratic Party, which at its second Congress proclaimed regional self-government for those border regions which, in respect of their conditions of life and the composition of their population, differ from the regions of Russia proper. When Martov submitted this point for discussion at the Second Congress, he justified it on the grounds that the vast extent of Russia and the experience of our centralized administration point to the necessity and expediency of regional self-government for such large units as Finland, Poland, Lithuania, and the Caucasus. Any NATO stan who hates on Stalin has never read any of this, Stalin says, but it follows that regional self-government is to be interpreted as regional autonomy and not just cultural. But N goes further. According to him, regional autonomy for the Caucasus covers only one aspect of the question. Uh-oh. One? Only one? Why not two? So far, we've spoken only of the material development of local life. But the economic development of a region is facilitated not only by economic activity, but also by spiritual, cultural activity. A culturally strong nation is strong also in the economic sphere. But the cultural development of nations is possible only in the national languages. Consequently, all questions connected with the native language are questions of national culture. Such are the questions of education, the jurisdiction, the church, literature, art, science, the theater, etc. If the material development of a region unites nations, matters of national culture disunite them and place each in a separate sphere. Activities of the former kind are associated with a definite territory. This is not the case with matters of national culture. These are associated not with a definite territory, but with the existence of a definite nation. The fate of the Georgian language interests a Georgian, no matter where he lives. It would be a sign of profound ignorance to say that Georgian culture concerns only the Georgians who live in Georgia. Take, for instance, the Armenian Church. Armenians of various localities and states take part in the administration of its affairs. Territory plays no part here. Or, for instance, the creation of a Georgian museum interests not only the Georgians of Tiflis, but also the Georgians of Baku, Kutaisi, I don't know, St. Petersburg, etc. He's got Georgia on his mind. Hence, the administration and control of all affairs of national culture must be left to the nations concerned. We proclaim in favor of cultural national autonomy for the Caucasian nationalities. Stalin says, in short, since culture is not territory, and territory is not culture, cultural national autonomy is required. That is all N can say in the latter's favor. We shall not stop to discuss again national cultural autonomy in general. We've already spoken of its objectionable character. We should like to point out only that, while being unsuitable in general, cultural national autonomy is also meaningless and nonsensical in relation to Caucasian conditions. And for the following reason. Cultural national autonomy presumes more or less developed nationalities with a developed culture and literature. Failing these conditions, autonomy loses all sense and becomes an absurdity. But in the Caucasus, there are a number of nationalities, each possessing a primitive culture, a separate language, but without its own literature, nationalities. Nationalities, moreover, which are in a state of transition, partly becoming assimilated and partly continuing to develop. How is cultural national autonomy to be applied to them? They're different conditions than these developed cultural units that we've been talking about. What's to be done with such nationalities? How are they to be organized into separate cultural national unions? They're in a state of transition. Some are transitioning into another national community. What about if we can't tell exactly where they're? How do we do this, right? What is to be done? Oh, here we go. I'm going to butcher some. I'm sorry, guys. What is to be done with the Mingrelians, the Abkhasians, the Adjarians, the Svanetians, the Lesgians, and so on, who speak different languages but do not possess a literature of their own? To what nations are they to be attached? Can they be organized into national unions? Around what cultural affairs are they to be organized? What is to be done with the Ossetians, of whom the trans-Caucasian Ossetians are becoming assimilated? Are you ready for this, Ross? But are as yet by no means wholly assimilated by the Georgians, while the cis-Caucasian Ossetians, and I did not look that up, are partly being assimilated by the Russians and partly continuing to develop, and are creating their own literature. Again, I'm not sure what that. I am a little bit confused by the whole trans-Caucasian, cis-Caucasian thing. I'm very not understanding. That's okay. It feels like I can move on. It feels like a minor point, but something to figure out later. He says, how are they to be organized into a single national union? To what national union should one attach the Adjarians, who speak the Georgian language, but whose culture is Turkish, and who profess the religion of Islam? Shall they be organized separately from the Georgians with regards to religious affairs, and together with the Georgians with regard to other cultural affairs? And how about the Kobaletians, the Ingushes, the Ingilois? I'm sorry. What kind of autonomy is that which excludes a whole number of nationalities from the list? No, that is not a solution of the national question, but the fruit of idle fancy. He says, but let us grant the impossible and assume that our ends national cultural autonomy has been put into effect. Where would it lead to? What would be its results? Take, for instance, the trans-Caucasian Tatars. With their minimum percentage of literates, their schools controlled by the omnipotent mullahs, and their culture permeated by the religious spirit. Is it not difficult to understand that to organize them into cultural national union would mean to place them under the control of the mullahs? To deliver them over to the tender mercies of reactionary mullahs? To create a new stronghold of spiritual enslavement of the Tatar masses to their worst enemy? But since when have social democrats made it a practice to bring grist to the mill of the reactionaries? He seems really mad, so I try to bring that energy for you guys. He's got a lot of heat for these guys. He says, could the Caucasian liquidators really find nothing better to proclaim than the isolation of the trans-Caucasian Tatars within a cultural national union, which would which would place the masses under the thraldom of vicious reactionaries? No, that is no solution of the national question. The national question in the Caucasus can be solved only by drawing the belated nations and nationalities into the common stream of a higher culture. It is the only progressive solution and the only solution acceptable to social democracy. Yeah, what's the deal here? Why are you doing this to me? Why? Let me highlight. Okay. I paid $3 for this. He says, he says, it is the only progressive solution and acceptable to social democracy. He says, regional autonomy in the Caucasus is acceptable because it would draw the belated nations into the common cultural development. It would help them to cast off the shell of small nation insularity. It would impel them forward and facilitate access to the benefits of higher culture. Cultural national autonomy, however, acts in a diametrically opposite direction because it shuts up the nation within their old shells, binds them to the lower stages of cultural development, and prevents them from rising to the higher stages of culture. In this way, national autonomy counteracts the beneficial aspects of regional autonomy and nullifies it. He says, cultural national autonomy isn't just not good, it's bad. I guess I said that in the last chapter. I'm starting to repeat myself. That is why the mixed type of autonomy, which combines national cultural autonomy and regional autonomy as proposed by N, is also unsuitable. This unnatural combination does not improve matters but makes them worse. Because, in addition to retarding the development of the belated nations, it transforms regional autonomy into an arena of conflict between the nations organized in the national unions. And I believe that was explained in the previous chapter. Thus, cultural national autonomy, which is unsuitable generally, would be a senseless reactionary undertaking in the Caucasus. So much for the cultural national autonomy of N and his Caucasian fellow thinkers. I'm so curious who this N is, He says, whether the Caucasian liquidators will take a step forward and follow in the footsteps of the Bund on the question of organization also, the future will show. So far, in the history of social democracy, federalism in organization always preceded national autonomy in program. The Austrian Social Democrats introduced organizational federalism as far back as 1897, and it was only 2 years later, in 1899, that they adopted national autonomy. The Bundists spoke distinctly of national autonomy for the first time in 1901, whereas organizational federalism had been practiced by them since 1897. The Caucasian liquidators have begun from the end, from national autonomy. If they continue to follow in the footsteps of the Bund, they will first have to demolish the whole existing organizational edifice, which was erected at the end of the 1890s on the basis of internationalism, which, I've got to be honest, gives me a boner. But easy though it was to adopt national autonomy, which is still not understood by the workers, it will be difficult to demolish an edifice which it has taken years to build and which has been raised and cherished by the workers of all the nationalities of the Caucasus. This Herostratian undertaking, am I saying that wrong, has only begun, has only to begun, and the eyes of the workers will be open to the nationalist character of cultural national autonomy. The nationalist character of cultural national autonomy. Ciscaucasia, thank you, Chad, is another term for the northern region of Caucasus. You may be referring to the physical splitting of the region by the mountain range. Okay. Presumably there's people in the southern region more or potentially aligned with the Ottoman Empire and or anti-Russian and or anti-Bolshevik, but the Transcaucasians from the south may have been living in the northern regions due to economic migration. You wrote, okay, interesting. Thank you, Chad. That's just great. That's why we learn together. I love that. All right. While the Caucasians are settling the national question in the usual manner, by means of verbal and written discussion, the All-Russian Conference of the Liquidators has invented a most unusual method. It is a simple and easy method. Listen to this. Having heard the communication of the Caucasian delegation to effect that it is necessary to demand national cultural autonomy, this conference, while expressing no opinion on the merits of this demand, declares that such an interpretation of the clause of the program, which recognizes the right of every nationality to self-determination, does not contradict the precise meaning of the program. Thus, first of all, they express no opinion on the merits of it, the question, and then they declare an original method. And what does this original conference declare? They declare that the demand for national cultural autonomy does not contradict the precise meaning of the program, which recognizes the right of nations to self-determination. And let me just clarify here. I'm asking, I'm not really of the program. That's in reference to the Social Democrats program, their policies, their agreed on stuff, right? Let us examine this proposition. The clause on self-determination speaks of the rights of nations. According to this clause, nations have the right not only of autonomy, but also of secession. By this clause, nations have the right to deport settlers. Am I wrong? I'm not necessarily supporting that policy, but they have that right. It is a question of political self-determination. Whom did the liquidators want to fool when they endeavored to misinterpret this right of nations to political self-determination, which has long been recognized by the whole of international social democracy? Or perhaps the liquidators will try to wriggle out of the question and defend themselves by the sophism that cultural national autonomy does not contradict the rights of nations? That is to say, if all the nations in a given state agree to arrange their affairs on the basis of cultural national autonomy, they, the given sum of nations, are fully entitled to do so, and nobody may forcibly impose a different form of political life on them. He says, if the nations actually choose this, fine. But cultural national autonomy can't be imposed. That's the issue here. This is both new and clever. Should it not be added that, speaking generally, a nation has the right to abolish its own constitution, replace it by a system of tyranny, and revert to the old order on the grounds that the nation, and the nation alone, has the right to determine its own destiny? We repeat, in this sense, neither cultural national autonomy nor any other kind of nationalist reaction contradicts the rights of nations. The rights of nations includes the rights of them to do things you don't want them to do. Is this what the esteemed conference wanted to say? No, not that. It specifically says that cultural national autonomy does not contradict not the rights of nations, but the precise meaning of the program. The point here is the program and not the rights of nations. Yeah. Let's put it this way. They say X doesn't contradict Y. So they're starting with X instead of Y. You get that, right? Why aren't they starting with Y? Why aren't they starting with the program, the social democratic program? They're starting with something else. He says, the point here is the program, X, and not the rights of nations, Y. Or I got it backwards. The point is the program. Okay. And that is quite understandable. If it were some nation that addressed itself to the conference of liquidators, the conference might have directly declared that the nation has a right to cultural national autonomy. But it was not a nation that addressed itself to the conference, but a delegation of Caucasian social democrats. Bad social democrats. It is true, but social democrats nevertheless. And they inquired not about the rights of nations, but whether cultural national autonomy contradicted the principles of social democracy, whether it did not contradict the precise meaning of the program of social democracy. Thus, the rights of nations and the precise meaning of the program of social democracy are not one and the same thing. Evidently, there are demands which, while they do not contradict the rights of nations, may yet contradict the precise meaning of the program. And if you're getting lost in the sauce here, it's okay. It's a little convoluted. For example, he says, the program of the Social Democrats contains a clause on the freedom of religion. According to this clause, any group of persons have the right to profess any religion they please. Catholicism, the religion of the Orthodox Church, etc. Social Democrats will combat all forms of religious persecution, be it members of the Orthodox Church, Catholics, or Protestants. Does this mean that Catholicism, Protestantism, etc., do not contradict the precise meaning of the program? No, it does not. Social Democrats will always protest against persecution of Catholicism or Protestantism. They will always defend the right of nations to profess any religion they please. But at the same time, on the basis of a correct understanding of the interests of the proletariat, they will carry on agitation against Catholicism, Protestantism, and the religion of the Orthodox Church in order to achieve the triumph of the socialist world outlook. They will support your right to do something, but they don't necessarily support that thing. It's not confusing, okay? If you understand free speech, you get the idea. He says, and they will do so just because there's no doubt that Protestantism, Catholicism, the religion of the Orthodox Church, etc., contradicts the precise meaning of the program, that is, the correctly understood interests of the proletariat. The program. When they say the program, that's what you should be thinking. Yeah. He says the same must be said of self-determination. Nations have a right to arrange their affairs as they please. For instance, they can deport settler classes. There are people who consider themselves communists and Marxists, who believe that national self-determination for First Nations does not include that. You don't have to support that policy of deporting settler classes. But do you support First Nations' rights to do so if they so choose? Because if you don't, you're not a communist. You're pretty much a fascist. You're more a nationalist than you are a fascist. And that is literally the way to understand the so-called American, there's that red flag, Communist Party. They're more American than communist. They're more nationalist than socialist. Where have you heard this before? Reading on. He says, obviously, the rights of nation. Oh, wait. Oh, I'm at the top of the page. I'm at the top of the page. The same must be said of self-determination. Nations have a right to arrange their affairs as they please. They have a right to preserve any of their national institutions, whether beneficial or harmful. Nobody can, or nobody has a right to, forcibly interfere in the life of a nation. But that does not mean that social democracy will not combat and agitate against the harmful institutions of nations and against the inexpedient demands of nations. On the contrary, it's the duty of social democracy to conduct such agitation and to endeavor to influence the will of nations so that the nations may arrange their affairs in the way that will best correspond to the interests of the proletariat. For this reason, social democracy, while fighting for the right of nations to self-determination, will at the same time, for instance, agitate, for instance, against the secession of the Tatars, or against cultural national autonomy for the Caucasian nations. For both, while not contradicting the rights of these nations, do contradict the precise meaning of the program, again, the interests of the Caucasian proletariat. Obviously, the rights of nations and the precise meaning of the program are on two entirely different planes. Whereas the precise meaning of the program expresses the interests of the proletariat as scientifically formulated in the program of the latter, the rights of nations may express the interests of any class, bourgeoisie, or aristocracy, clergy, etc., depending on the strength and influence of these classes. On the one hand are the duties of Marxists, on the other the rights of nations, which consists of various classes. The rights of nations and the principles of social democracy may or may not contradict each other, just as, say, the Pyramid of Cheops may or may not contradict the famous conference of the Liquidators. They are simply not comparable. Okay, the pyramid is the pyramid of Giza, you know. I think the story was commissioned by Cheops' father. I think Cheops is like the guy's nickname or something. Does anyone need to know? It's not important. It's talking about the pyramid in Egypt, okay? He says, but it follows that the esteemed conference most unpardonably, muddled two entirely different things. The result obtained was not a solution of the national question, but an absurdity, an abomination, according to which the rights of nations and the principles of social democracy do not contradict each other, and consequently, every demand of a nation may be made compatible with the interests of the proletariat. Consequently, no demand of a nation which is striving for self-determination will contradict the precise meaning of the program. They pay no heed to logic. It was this absurdity that gave rise to the now famous resolution of the Conference of the Liquidators, which declares that the demand for national cultural autonomy does not contradict the precise meaning of the program. But it was only the laws of logic that were violated by the Conference of the Liquidators. But it was not only the laws of logic. He says, by sanctioning cultural national autonomy, it also violated its duty to Russian social democracy. Great job, guys. It most definitely did violate the precise meaning of the program, for it's well known that the Second Congress, which adopted the program, emphatically repudiated cultural national autonomy. Here's what was said at the conference in this connection. Goldblatt, the Bundist, says, I deem it necessary that special institutions be set up to protect the freedom of cultural development of nationalities, and I therefore propose that the following words be added to Section 8, and the creation of institutions which will guarantee them complete freedom of cultural development. This, as we know, as we discussed in previous chapters, is the Bund's definition of cultural national autonomy. Martinov pointed out that general institutions must be so constituted as to protect particular interests also. It is impossible to create a special institution to guarantee freedom for cultural development of the nationalities. He says you can't do it. Yegorov says, on the question of nationality, we can adopt only negative proposals. That is, we are opposed to all restrictions upon nationality. But we, as social democrats, are not concerned with whether any particular nationality will develop as such. That is a spontaneous process. Koltsov said, the delegates from the Bund are always offended when their nationalism is referred to. Yet the amendment proposed by the delegate from the Bund is of a purely nationalist character. We are asked to take purely offensive measures in order to support even nationalities that are dying out. In the end, Goldblatt's amendment was rejected by the majority, only 3 votes being cast for it. Thus, it's clear that the Conference of the Liquidators did contradict the precise meaning of the program. It violated the program. It was voted against already. We discussed this. The Liquidators are now trying to justify themselves by referring to the Stockholm Congress, which they allege sanctioned cultural national autonomy. They said you said it was okay. We said we already talked about it. We talked about it. We said it was good. We're not violating the program, guys. Thus, V. Kosovsky writes, as we know, according to the agreement adopted by the Stockholm Congress, the Bund was allowed to preserve its national program, pending a decision on the national question by a General Party Congress. This Congress recorded that national cultural autonomy, at any rate, does not contradict the General Party program. But the efforts of the Liquidators are in vain. The Stockholm Congress never thought of sanctioning the program of the Bund. It merely agreed to leave the question open for the time being. It tabled the question. The brave Kosovsky did not have enough courage to tell the whole truth. But the facts speak for themselves. Here they are. He goes, I brought receipts. He says, quote, an amendment was moved by Galen. The question of the national program is left open in view of the fact that it is not being examined by the Congress. For 50 votes against 32. Voice, well, what does that mean, open? Chairman, when we say that the national question is left open, it means that the Bund may maintain its decision on this question until the next Congress. As you see, the Congress did not examine the question of the national program of the Bund. It left it open, leaving the Bund itself to decide the fate of its program until the next General Congress met. In other words, the Stockholm Congress avoided the question, expressing no opinion on cultural national autonomy one way or another. And in doing so, they sort of gave the Bund an opportunity to back off their reactionary national program. They gave him an out, I think. I could be reading into it too much, but whatever. The Conference of the Liquidators, however, most definitely undertakes to give an opinion on the matter, declares cultural national autonomy to be acceptable and endorses it in the name of the party program. The difference is only too evident. Thus, in spite of all its artifices, the Conference of the Liquidators did not advance the national question a single step. All it could do was squirm before the Bund and the Caucasian national liquidators. And that there is chapter 6, the penultimate chapter. I'm up to $10. You love that. Again, in this chapter, Stalin continued his ideological struggle against cultural national autonomy, this time in the context of the Caucasian Social Democrats' failure to succumb to reaction by their disavowal of the regional economic autonomy in favor of national cultural autonomy, thereby throwing the masses at the mercy of vicious reactionaries, thus violating the program of social democracy. In short, the so-called cultural national autonomy of the Caucasians, of the Bund, and of the Austrians at the time centered nationalism in their politics more than they centered socialism. And that only ends up harming the working and oppressed masses. Okay, and that is chapter 6. If you enjoyed this reading, and if you're watching live, stick around. I believe we'll continue reading. And if you enjoyed reading this, and if you got something out of it, if you learned something, if you laughed, if you had fun, if you cried, feel free to support. You can support on Twitch with a subbie. You can support on Patreon. You can support on Stream Elements. Or you can tip directly through PayPal, Cash App, Venmo, at iDanSimpson. Thank you for listening. If you checked out chapter 6, make sure you check out the final chapter, chapter 7. Love your face. See you next time.